Hi, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome to this session of Family Story Times on Race and Diversity. I'm Sierra Williams. I'm from the Red Bank Public Library, but I'm coming to you from my home today because we're celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And so, of course, we're going to be talking about Dr. King today and his legacy. And I want to start by saying that a lot of times when we talk about Dr. King and the civil rights movement, we talk about it as if it had happened a long, long time ago. And really, you need to know that it wasn't that long ago. And I think you probably know somebody in your life, in your family, who was alive at the same time that Dr. Martin Luther King was leading the civil rights movement back in the 1950s and 60s. So this is my chance to remind you that the whole reason for this program is to get your families to talk about issues of race and justice and equality. And so this is your chance. This is your chance. Find somebody who was alive at the same time as Dr. Martin Luther King and then ask them questions. What was it like back then? Because here's the thing. At that time, and really throughout American history, Black people and white people lived very, very different lives and were treated very differently because of the color of their skin. And so not only did they live different kinds of lives, but they lived really separate lives because Black people weren't allowed to even live in the same neighborhoods as white people. Black children weren't allowed to go to the same schools as white children. People lived in different places. They went to different churches. They belonged to different organizations. Black people weren't even allowed to swim in the same swimming pool as white people. And there were separate beaches too. And I know it sounds ridiculous in light of the way things are now, but I'm not kidding you. This is the way it was in a lot of parts of America and even here in New Jersey. I know people who have told me stories about experiences like this. And so it's really important to know that this is what America was like, and this is what Dr. King was fighting to change. And so his life and his message and his legacy are so great because he did help change to come. And that's why we have a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day to celebrate him. And so I want to know what you think about when you think about Dr. King. I know that you learn about him in school because we do celebrate this holiday and we get the day off. What is it that you think about when you think about Dr. King? That he was a great teacher, that he was a preacher, that he led marches, that he was a great speaker. Well, he was all of those things. I think for me that he was a great leader and a great example. And I feel that he taught many lessons, but the three that are that resonate with me are: number one, he said that no matter what color you are on the outside, we're all people and we're all the same on the inside. We've talked about this a million times in this program. So I'm not going to go deep into that, but you can talk about it, of course. The other thing he said was that no one is better than anybody else, and that we all have the potential to be great. And that's because there's nobody in this whole wide world that's just like you. And there's nobody in the world like me. We're all special, we're all unique, and we all deserve the chance and the opportunities to be what we want to be and to be all that we can be. Don't you think that's right? The last thing he taught that I know is so important is that when you think that someone is being treated unfairly, that something is not right, that you're not being treated fairly, then what we can do is use our voice and speak up and try to make a change. And Dr. Martin Luther King was a great speaker. He used his voice and his words to touch people's hearts and minds and and to influence them and show them the injustice that was in the world at that time, and to encourage them to take action to change things. And that's why his legacy is so strong. And so he gave a lot of speeches, and one of his most famous speeches took place at the March on Washington in 1963. And most people think of it as his I Have a Dream speech. And so I want to play for you a little snippet of that dream and of that speech. See if you can hear his voice.
I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream.
Can you hear everybody clapping? There was hundreds of thousands of people there in Washington, D.C. to hear him speak that day. And he spoke of his dream. And so the book that I'm going to read today celebrates him and that speech and those words, I have a dream, on that day. And so let's take a look at that now. I'm actually going to scooch around so that you can see the pictures better. Maybe I'll just stand up. That would make sense. All right, this book is called A Place to Land, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Speech That Inspired a Nation. It's written by Barry Wittenstein, and it's illustrated by Jerry Pinkney. And I always encourage you to look intently at the illustrations, because they wouldn't be in the book if they weren't important to the story. And so on the inside cover, we have a picture of Dr. Martin Luther King and his yellow pad as he thinks about the speech he's going to write. We have a picture of the hotel where he wrote that speech. And then this is like a bird's eye view of the Lincoln Memorial where he gave that speech. And here we go. It says, Martin Luther King Jr. was once asked if the hardest part of preaching was knowing where to begin. No, he said, the hardest part is knowing where to end. It's terrible to be circling up there without a place to land. But on August 27th, the night before the 1963 March on Washington, the strong and steady voice of the civil rights movement wasn't sure what to say or how to say it. So Martin did what great men do. He asked for guidance. Not from above, at least not at first. In the lobby of the Willard Hotel, where Abraham Lincoln once stood, a meeting of the minds took place. You have to preach, said Reverend Ralph Abernathy. Most of the folks coming tomorrow are coming to hear you preach. Wyatt T. Walker agreed, but added, don't use the lines about I have a dream. You've used it too many times already. Bayard Rustin, who organized the march, wanted to hear about jobs, jobs, and more jobs, not dreams or scriptures. Clarence Jones, one of Martin's speechwriters, yes, even Martin had speechwriters, suggested a marvelous metaphor, a fresh metaphor, one never heard before, a bad check. It meant the time had come for America to make good on her promise of equality and pay up, for her citizens of color had grown weary, frustrated, and angry for justice long overdue. Reverend Walter Fauntleroy agreed. Whatever you do, he said, keep that in there. For 2 hours, while these learned men raised their voices and pointed their fingers, Martin remained still. Part of Martin's greatness, he knew the importance of listening. It grew late. With a long night of writing still to come, Martin stood and excused himself. I'm now going upstairs to my room to counsel with my Lord, he said. I'll see you all tomorrow. His advisors fell silent, stunned, unsure if Martin would use any of their ideas in his speech the next day. Until tomorrow, then, they mumbled. and retreated to bed. Upstairs, alone in his suite, surrounded by rough drafts and scribbled notes on yellow legal pads, Martin saw Rosa, Fannie Lou, Emmett, Medgar, the children of Birmingham, and so many others, their faces forever seared into his memory. Heroes all, chased by snarling police dogs, knocked off their feet by high-pressure water jets, arrested, beaten, shot, and hung, shocked and poked by cattle prods, their homes, schools, and churches burned and bombed. Midnight, writing, rewriting, rephrasing, rehearsing the lines out loud to an audience of four walls, changing the pacing, stretching the vowels, dividing words into syllables to create inner rhymes and alliterations. It was like poetry, said Andrew Young, the soft-spoken pastor who counseled Martin throughout the night. Words crossed out 3-4 times, searching for the perfect meaning and rhythm. 4 a.m. The handwritten speech finished, but not finished. Martin, exhausted, surrendered to sleep. While at the same time, up in Harlem and New York City, on 125th Street, in Chicago and Philadelphia, Cleveland and Memphis, crowds cheered friends and relatives climbing aboard chartered buses and trains, on foot and on planes, singing, "We shall overcome." 8 a.m. Hoping for a peaceful day, the shining city on the Potomac awoke to armed soldiers patrolling Constitution Avenue, as if preparing for war against an invading army. Noon. Women in flowing white dresses, gentlemen in pressed white shirts and snazzy fedoras, carrying signs of protest, carrying signs of hope, walked past the reflecting pool, watching their reflections silhouetted against the bluest of pearl blue skies. 2:30 p.m. Martin kept refining, painting with a preacher's fine brush, a light shade of wisdom here, a darker shade of frustration there, the darkest shade of for whites only, everywhere. Approaching 3:30, introduced as the moral leader of our nation, Martin stood at the podium, ready to lead his people to the promised land. He removed the folded white sheet of paper from the pocket of his black suit, the speech typed and finished, but never finished, and placed it flat on the lectern. Under the watchful marble eyes of the 16th President Abraham Lincoln, Martin's rich baritone, God's trombone, rang out across the ages, gathering the glorious images of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, and wrapping them around the writings of Langston Hughes, the Bible, and spirituals he learned as a child. Adding a sentence here for emphasis, replacing a word for clarity, changes made in the moment to match the mood of the moment. The speech was good. The crowd applauded where it should, but Martin wanted more. He paused. Even he couldn't say why, but others knew. "Tell him about the dream, Martin." Mahalia Jackson, the queen of gospel, Martin's divine muse, who inspired Martin as Martin inspired her, heard what was missing: the passion of a Sunday morning sermon. Again, she shouted, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." The Baptist preacher, son, grandson, and great-grandson of Baptist preachers, carefully moved the script off to the side. Martin was done circling. The lecture was over. He was going to church, his place to land, and taking a congregation of 250,000 along for the ride. 4 words spoken many times in Chicago, Detroit, Birmingham, and Albany, Georgia, but never as emotional as on this day, never intended to be heard on this day, not even written down for this day, not even once. Here's the 4 words. I have a dream. I have a dream. Words he risked his life for and spent time in jail for to convince Black America and white America that a walking arm in arm was the only way to save America. Martin's voice soared as sweetly as Mahalia's, from my country 'tis of thee, to let freedom ring, concluding with the mighty crescendo, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Through the crowd and from sea to shining sea, tears rolled down like a mighty stream, because the vision of a world where love triumphs over hate grabs hold of the heart and won't let go. This was the picture Martin painted. This was his gift, further proof of his greatness. But now is not the time for congratulations. There was one more stop to make. 4 p.m. Whisked away to the White House, a house built by those enslaved, to meet the 35th President John F. Kennedy, who had been slow to embrace the civil rights movement and tried to convince its leaders to cancel that march. Now greeted those same men in the Oval Office, extending a handshake to all, but saving a special welcome for Martin. I have a dream. For some in the room, Kennedy's warm smile and handshake were bittersweet. 8 p.m., returning to the Willard Hotel, where less than 24 hours earlier voices were raised and fingers were pointed, the wise men gathered once again, this time to celebrate and to reflect upon the day that was. Leader, you swept today, Reverend Abernathy told Martin. You preached today, John Lewis added. You was smoking, Clarence Jones had told Martin moments after the speech. The words were so hot they was just burning off the page. They all knew more battles lay ahead. Angry late-night meetings in hotel lobbies, frantic phone calls, tears and blood to be shed, fighting every inch to cross a bridge to make Martin's dream come true. And those battles continue to be fought. But that night brought optimism and laughter, for they all agreed. Martin stepped up to the lectern and stepped down on the other side of history. That's the end. I know that book was a little long, but I really wanted to read it to give you a sense of the kind of person that Dr. Martin Luther King was. Did you notice how much time and thought and effort he put into writing that speech? Did you notice that he didn't do it all by himself? That he asked for help and he got help from his friends and advisors? And did you notice that in spite of all that preparation, when it came down to it, there was a moment where he had to put that whole speech aside and just wing it and go from his heart? And so that's what we need to do too sometimes. We need to be prepared, and then sometimes we can take it to a whole new direction just by believing in ourselves and what we know is right and saying what we believe. And so I think there are so many lessons to be had from this book, so many conversations that can be started, not just by the story itself, but there's a lot of information in the back of the book. There's notes from the author and the illustrator. There's information on all of his advisors and all of the references that are made in the story. So I really encourage you to check this out from the library so you can learn some more. The older you are, the more you'll get out of it. And maybe you want to purchase this book and add it to your own collection because it is a beautiful book. All right, well, this speech and this civil rights movement took place a long time ago, but here's the thing. Dr. King's message of hope, of unity, of equality is still important and relevant today. And that's because racism and discrimination still exist today. You only have to watch the news or be on top of the news to know that. And the murder of George Floyd was just one example. There's so many things that happen that aren't even in the news anymore. But don't forget about the violence against Asian Americans, about all the hate speech that is going on against our Jewish friends right now, and Native Americans who have been mistreated for hundreds and hundreds of years. There's so many things that we can talk about. And again, I hope that your families do talk about these things from time to time. It's really important that you help each other understand what's true, how to think about it, how to react and talk about it with your friends and out in the world. And not just issues of race and social justice, but there's historic things happening all over the world right now in your little lifetimes, from the COVID pandemic to weather disasters, the war in Ukraine. I mean, the list goes on and on. We're living in historic times right now. And so the things that are happening in the world are going to be in the history books one day. And a kid in your family might be coming to you and saying, Grandpa, what was it like back in the year 2023? It's true. All right, let's get back to Martin Luther King Day. I'm going to give you a couple ideas of things that you can talk about and do to celebrate this day. Number one, talk about the dream. I paid you a little snippet of the dream about Dr. King hoping that his children would grow up in a world where they would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That means, what kind of people are they? Are they good? Are they kind? Are they funny? Are they helpful? That's how we should judge people, not by the color of their skin. And there was so much more to his dream, though. So I really think it would be great if you read or listened to or watched a video of the I Have a Dream speech, and then talk about whether that dream has come true. What do you think Dr. Martin Luther King would think about the world today? And you can also talk about what your dream may be for the future of America. The other thing I want to tell you is that Martin Luther King Jr. Day is an official National Day of Service. And there's only one other National Day of Service on our calendar, and that's September 11th. So these are special days, and there's days dedicated to service. Can you imagine if every person in America did an act of service on MLK Day? That would be amazing. And to be of service just means to be of help, to help somebody who needs it. You don't have to give money. You don't have to give away your toys or give physical things. You can give of your time, and you can just do something to help somebody. And I'm going to tell you a secret about that. When you are of service, or when you help somebody who needs it, it helps you too. That's not really a secret. That's something that everybody should know. When you help somebody, it helps you too, because you will get a boost of pride and a warm feeling inside when you help somebody that really needs it. Trust me on that. You try it, and when you feel that, you want to do it again. and you keep on doing it and you pass it on. And so that's your challenge. Be of service this weekend, because Martin Luther King said everybody can be great because everybody can serve. And so I just want you to take some peace and love with you while you do that. All right, take some, pass it on, and I'll see you next time. Have a great weekend. Thanks for joining me.